Hello, welcome to a very special GB Boxing and Fighting Irish live from Dublin Airport as I go on the way to Morocco. Quite different this evening because my audio is not working great and I don't want so much airport background noise. So you'll all be nice to know I will be as quiet as possible today. So first of all, we're going to discuss the weekend action, which will be funny because I'll probably be discussing it. But first of all, I want to get the guys' views of it and what they thought, and then I'll give a brief, I promise, a review of my experiences in the T-Mobile in Las Vegas. So as usual, we'll start how we always do in the order and start with Adam.
So I'll just briefly kind of walk us through the card, and then we'll get to the main event as kind of quickly as we can. Bam Rodriguez was obviously the chief support on the undercard, and he was in with a really tough Israel Gonzalez, as we said last week. And I think it's a funny world in boxing where basically it's a case of you're only as good as your last fight, and everyone thought Bam Rodriguez was this incredible, untouchable flyweight. And he went in with a really good competitive contender, probably wasn't at his best and looked not bad, not great, won comfortably. This is the thing. It's underappreciated getting wins like that when you're fighting quality top 10, top 15 guys. They're going to be hard fights, like not all of them. And it's probably also the difference between fighting a fighter in his prime in Gonzalez and perhaps somebody past his prime in Siriketsu or Rungvisai. What was it, Akhmadaliev? He fairly comfortable in Rosado. Rosado is a tough man. And I think with, like you said, with Akhmadaliev, just get him in there with somebody. Get him in there with a top 10 guy, and let's see if he's got it or not. Beck the Bully is a really clear fight to make, and I think that would be a good redemption one for both of them. So that's the fight I'd like to see for him next. What was the other one on the main card? Conway versus Amma Williams.
Yeah,
it was one of those ones where it was Conway, really good, solid boxer. I didn't have enough pop to keep Amma away. Knocked down, sealed the fight for me, and it was one of those weird ones where you're like, oh, this is exactly what I expected to happen. So it kind of is what it is. For the main event, Canelo versus Triple G. I think it suffered from its comparison to the previous two fights in terms of everyone was calling it very boring. I didn't find it very boring, but it wasn't the barnstorming entertainment that we thought. Combination of factors here. I thought Golovkin very much showed his age there. And Alvarez was very good at the start. Golovkin at this age, basically, everything has to come off the jab. So whereas before he'd be able to step to you, and there's a little bit more, he was always jab-centric, but there was things like lead right hands, lead left hooks, and he was then able to kind of work off it. At the age he's at now, with the slower feet and the slightly slower reactions, if he's not touching you with the jab, he won't throw. And for the first 8 rounds, Canelo's head movement, throwing the combination and then disengaging, just meant that Golovkin was not throwing. And it's shown in the stats. Golovkin threw 300 less punches in this fight than he did in the second fight against Canelo. And it just showed. And for me personally, I thought the scorecards were pretty terrible. I had 9 rounds to 3, so 117, 111, and I thought Golovkin won all of his rounds in the last 4 rounds. So however you scored it, I didn't give him anything until the 9th. And then he started to kind of get a bit better as Canelo just kind of stepped his foot off the gas. He's another one, I think he didn't look quite as good as he's been looking recently. And I think a lot of that comes down to what made Alvarez really, really special was that head movement and that combination punching of it. At this stage, he's not throwing combinations to the degree he is anymore. It's very big shot, move his head, disengage. And it's fine, and it worked plenty against Golovkin, but I want to see a bit more activity, but it's just necessarily not there at this stage. I thought he was a fair winner, and the fight I want to see next for Canelo is Benavidez. That's the fight you've got to see at that. If he's going to stick at 168, Benavidez is the fight. As for Golovkin, I hope he walks away. I mean, the man's tough as old boots. He didn't look like he was in any trouble whatsoever. Canelo did neglect the body, but it is what it is. If he's not going to walk away, if Chris Eubank Jr. beats Conor Benn, I wouldn't mind seeing that fight. Over to you, Michael.
Michael?
Mike? Michael, you're up there. Anyway, while Michael's
I
thinking
brought
about
up
it,
tears.
let's go to Luke.
Okay. Oh, is he there? Go ahead.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I am pretty much in agreement with what you said there, Adam, in regards to the whole card. Conway Williams was what it said on the tin. Williams up at middleweight this time. I know he was saying how big he was, but he just doesn't have the punch. And if you don't have that, you're not going to deter a guy like Williams, and he will overwhelm you eventually. As I said last week, he's a better athlete than he is a boxer, but he makes that work for him against the lesser opponents. And I think Conway has found his level, and I think that's where he will remain. But yeah, Williams, it's hard to know where he can go from here either in such a stacked division at the lower end of the division. Obviously, at the upper end, we were saying it's not the deepest, but it is quite deep when you're at that level that Williams is at right now. Oh, Michael's gone.
He'll be back.
Yeah, he'll be back in a minute, I'd say. Yeah, with the Rosado fight, it was just kind of age again. As we were speaking about in the main event, Rosado can't box with them anymore. He's not got the speed and sleight of movement to box with them anymore. He's got to try and time that punch, and he just couldn't find it the other night, and it was a fair result, With Bam Rodriguez, we both said Gonzalez was going to be a tough fight for him. People who didn't know who he was or looked at him on paper might have underestimated him, as did Bam a little bit, I think. And one thing that impressed me with Gonzalez, and he kept on catching Bam with the same thing, was when he thought he was finished punching, Gonzalez threw one more. It was like he threw 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Yeah, like the delay.
Yeah. And that was catching Rodriguez nearly every time he was falling for it. He thought he was finished, he thought it was safe to go, and then the next punch would come. But yeah, again, he made it quite comfortable after 3 or 4 rounds and won. He won a tough fight, but easy enough. And I would equate that kind of like the, those 1-0 wins in the Premier League where your team's like, that wasn't a great performance, but 3 points is 3 points.
Yeah.
And those are what win you titles in the Premier League. And that's what he needed there. And he kept his belt and he'll go on to the next. Hopefully that fight against Sonny Edwards or something happens. That'd be an exciting one if he moves back down.
Yeah.
And because he said he wants his brother to be the king of the 115, so I could see him moving down.
Yeah. So wait, that's Superfly's 118.
Sorry, yeah, 118. So he wants Franco. It's Franco's brother, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
So he said he wants him. Yeah. So he might give up his belt and let his brother try and win that or whatever. But yeah, there's many exciting fights for him all the way from 112 to 118. And the main event, I thought, how do you put it? Like Golovkin, he just wouldn't let his hands go. And as you say, if he can't find you with the jab, he's not going to throw the rest of the punches. And Canelo just didn't let him. Canelo out-jabbed him for most of the first part of the fight. And Canelo's not a prolific jabber in his own right, but he was catching Golovkin. Golovkin's reflexes weren't there. His foot speed wasn't there. He wasn't even moving too well. And every time Canelo caught him, the couple of times to the body, Golovkin looked fragile enough. And there was one in the 5th round where he staggered him and put him against the ropes with a right hand to the body.
The right hand is what I was thinking as well. And the elbow comes in.
Mm-hmm. And I was thinking to myself, right, am I going to be right here now? Is he going to drop him in a couple of rounds? But then he neglected the body then and just kind of stuck to the overhand rights to the head. And I know Canelo mentioned he needs surgery on his left hand.
Yep.
I don't know if he had an injury going into the fight or not.
He's torn. So basically it's this. So I'll try and show you without getting there. It's this portion of the hand there. He's torn the ligaments through. He's had it since the Caleb Plant fight.
Right. Okay. Welcome back, Michael. I don't know if you can hear us. But yeah, it was an aged Golovkin. He's still aged fairly gracefully for the amount of fights he's had, both amateur and pro. And Canelo as well.
The technical issue.
That's all right. And yeah, I think what I said about Canelo, because I said it to a few of my friends as well, about Canelo not being exactly spectacular himself. The way I remember we were talking about the pound for pound, the way I rated him.
Yeah.
I think that did show on Saturday night what I was trying to say. Like he was good, but he wasn't. You're not putting him up there with the new Usyk, Crawford from last Saturday. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's absolutely it. And I think so. If we very quickly touch on the pound for pound so Canelo's fourth on my pound for pound rating, based on the fact that he was number one based on activity and what he'd achieved and how quickly. He then dropped to fourth because he lost to Bivol, and I think that Spence is the guy that a lot of people kind of had overtaking him. He just shunted everybody else up. And Spence hadn't done enough to warrant that kind of jump for me.
I would have put Jermell Charlo.
Yeah, but again, he's another one. They don't fight enough to do enough. Jermell Charlo's in my lower half, so he's somewhere between 5 and 10.
Yeah.
And I think your top three now are pretty much away on their own. Your Inoue, your Usyk, and your Crawford. And I think that nothing Canelo saw made me think, right, I need to drop him because he's just beaten Golovkin. I think it's the first time for me he's clearly beaten Golovkin. He's retained his 168-pound undisputed title. But I also wouldn't raise him. There's nothing I saw there.
No.
Yeah, there's nothing I saw there that went, right, I'm going to put him above Inoue. I'm going to put him above Bud. It's...
Now, one thing I'll say as well about Golovkin on Saturday was he looked a bit fleshy. He didn't look. Remember, I said it in the group chat there. Golovkin looked big at the press conference.
Yes.
And I was thinking, he doesn't look how he looks coming into middleweight, and it's only an 8-pound difference. And when, Golovkin's was a career 165-pounder at middleweight,
as an amateur.
Yeah. So it shouldn't have been. He looked very fleshy for me. It looked like he had a lot of muscle atrophy or something.
Well, it's bizarre because if you'd looked at Golovkin recently, so say for the Murata fight, he's been gradually becoming more and more muscle bound.
Yeah, that's
looking more and more defined. And it was, I agree, it was bizarre. I thought, it was one of those ones. I think it was a combination of he's just getting older. What amazes me is that for a guy that is 40, a guy that's clearly on the slide, like I would say he's maybe 60% of what he was 5 years ago.
Maybe even less, yeah.
Maybe even less than that. Canelo knocked out Plant, smashed Billy Joe Saunders' face in, and detached Callum Smith's bicep, and Golovkin.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it was a case of Canelo decided, maybe if I really pushed this, I could potentially break him.
I think it was risk reward.
Yeah. It's not worth it.
I think when you win the first 7 rounds as easily as Canelo won them, I think it's kind of if it's not broke, don't fix it kind of thing, And it was damage limitation then from Golovkin, I think, and Canelo did slow down significantly though.
Yeah, I thought from round 9 to round 9, 10, 11, and 12, I gave 3 of those to Golovkin.
And I mean,
he just looked like he slowed down.
Yeah, and if you did that against the Benavides, he's gonna perform a hurricane that you've never even seen before. Yeah. He's gonna absolutely come in bombing it. But as for Golovkin, me and my dad were both like, he needs to finish now. This is enough. But he said, I've got more belts at middleweight. I'll defend those. But I'm not being funny with you. Andrade would beat him. I think Charlo would definitely beat him.
This is the first time I'd pick Charlo over Golovkin now. Andrade, I think he's at 168 now. I think he's done at middleweight.
Yeah, but I think he'd move down for Golovkin though.
Yeah, probably. I think all of them would move for Golovkin.
What's his face? Who?
Januzbek.
Yeah, Januzbek. And you've got your man who fought Golovkin a couple of years ago, hurt him to the body. Begins with D. What's his name?
Derevyanchenko.
Yes, Derevyanchenko. Now, I thought the way Charlo handled him was excellent, to be honest. And I think he'd be fancying Golovkin now too. It'd
be a good rematch. It's one of those ones where I'm just like, I'd rather see him retire and be remembered for what he was.
Yeah, it's bad. This is no disrespect to Chris Eubank Jr., but it's bad when we're saying that would be a fight.
Yeah, because he was never, never even close to
not in the same stratosphere,
No, and now But the funny thing is, Golovkin is now what, top 3 now? I had him at number 1, and now I'm like, I'm not so sure. Top 3 middleweight in the world, and what he has is an incredible chin, heavy hands, and a jab. I've got one thing I want to talk about while I get the chance. I'll have a little rant and rave. So I got the DAZN commentary, the American DAZN commentary.
Yeah. Same.
It's dreadful, and I'm going to take umbrage with a lot of it, but one particular comment, I can't remember who made it. I'm going to guess
was
it was
the overhand right?
Yeah. Oh, it was doing my head in. And I'm just, so it's awful. And then there was the other one was Danny Jacobs said Golovkin has never had any feet.
Yeah.
Which is nonsense. It's just utter nonsense.
You also had Danny Jacobs saying they didn't hit that hard.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah.
Never listen to someone who's got a stake in it. So that's the DAZN commentary in America. It's so bad. Nope.
Yeah, I'm just going to come in, guys, because I'll have to go shortly. So I just want to give my review of the night live from the T-Mobile Arena. Apologies for any background noise. I think someone's playing Weakest Link. So I got there early and I caught a few of the prelims. I didn't catch the very good one, but I'm just going to talk about the BAM's fight and Triple G's fight. Look, I would call it Triple G's fight. That's very unfair to Canelo, but it was all about Triple G on the night for me. Bam Rodriguez, as both of you guys said it, and I would agree, it's a case of can you not send messages when I'm trying to talk? Sorry, let's try that again. So Bam Rodriguez, it was a tough fight for him, and by God, did he like punching low. He put Kenny Griffith Jr., not Kenny Griffith Jr., he put the ref in a really tough spot because he stopped the fight to give you man time, but then no warning was administered. So that was an error on the referee's part. But I understood the logic of it. You know, I mean, it wasn't that low, but nonetheless, the opponent made the most of it. But Bam, like, he did what he had to do, and like Luke said earlier, sometimes you got to get those 1-0 wins away to Stoke on a Tuesday. And if you get an away win 1-0 to Stoke on a Tuesday night, you've got my vote every day of the week. But I thought the fight was fine. I enjoyed it. I mean, so it was grand. The rest of the undercard was pretty lackluster. It was a very good fight, but I missed it because it was in the prelims. But and the Mexican crowd did not care one iota for anyone except Sal Canelo Alvarez. Because during the BAM fight, you could hear a pin drop in the crowd, even when there was a decent action happening. But at the end of the day, they paid their money; they get to do how they do it. Then came the main event, and we had an awful pre-recorded Mexican anthem, which was so bizarre. Not Mexican, Kazakhstani anthem. That was pre-recorded. That was awful. And then we did a wonderful rendition of the Mexican anthem and an amazing rendition of the Star Spangled Banner. So let's get to the boxing. When I saw it after the first 3 rounds, I was like, Gennady Golovkin obviously knows he hasn't got it in the tank anymore, and he was conserving his energy. Age, when you don't do all these performance-enhancing drugs, age has a terrible tendency of creeping up on you. It's a bit like Jessica Ennis-Hill. It's amazing when you're a natural athlete, you grow and fall naturally, whereas other people seem to have great longevity for bizarre reasons that we couldn't possibly comment on this show. Nonetheless, Canelo took control of the fight and was, winning the rounds easily enough. The first 2 rounds were very, they were just feel me out rounds, so I gave them 1 each because it'd be unfair to give 2 to any one because neither did anything special. Then Canelo took over. If I remember, I think it was the 7th round I gave to Gennady Golovkin. I just thought he had a little spurt there and he did some good punches, so I gave him that round. And then when we went into the championship rounds 10, 11, 12, I gave 2 of the 3 to Gennady Golovkin because I felt he really, like, he probably thought, right, I've conserved the energy and now I'm going to pick it up a bit. So he knew his limits, I think, and he did, and he gave the crowd something to cheer about as well. You know, he engaged with Canelo. It was good seeing them trade, and the 12th round was brilliant. I really enjoyed it, and the referee at the end, I think, was like everyone in the crowd. The first thing he did was he brought the 2 boxers together, but we actually didn't hear the final bell, and I thought there was 10 seconds left, but obviously there wasn't. I really enjoyed the T-Mobile Arena as a place for boxing. It's brilliant. Vegas is Vegas. But no, it was really, really good. However, I'm just going to do a bit of a Luke here now, and I'm going to name drop the shit out of it now. Uh, so you may or may not have seen from my Twitter that I went to the convention earlier, and there was all kinds of boxers there, and the queues were a mile long, and I was like, right, which queue will I join? And I got a few signatures, and then all of a sudden there was a bit of a commotion, and I turn around, and who's walking past me? Only Roberto Duran, the legend that is Roberto Duran. I just stuck out my fist, and he fist bumped me, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna die so happy right now. And he's just an aura about him. You know, maybe it was me or whatever, but it was so cool, you know. And Roy Jones Jr. was there, and he was cool too, but nobody had the effect that Roberto Duran had on me that day. I mean, and Marco Antonio Barrera was there as well, and he gave me a fist bump, and so did Roy Jones, by the way. But that was pretty damn awesome. So apparently, if I don't wash my hands ever again, I will get gangrene and die. So I'm likely to die, guys. Is what I'm saying. But no, that was really good, and I'm going to. What we're now going to do is we're going to preview the weekend's events, and I'm going to let kind of Adam take over. I don't know if I can move the host across. I'll probably have to do that beforehand or something. But Adam, if you take over that, and I'll go into the background or whatever, and you can just discuss the weekend's action.
Before we continue, can everyone hear me? Is that all right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Is that better now?
Yes.
I'll go for that. Great. Thank you.
Right, Michael, have you got anything you want to add in before we get started on Joyce Parker and Shakur Stevens? Because when I say Shakur Stevens, we're going to lose Luke.
So I'll keep it brief, I promise.
Yeah.
Sorry, Michael didn't give his review. Apologies.
That's okay. It was my own fault. Well, it wasn't my fault, but the connection wasn't great, and I was having a bit of technical difficulties. I'll keep it brief with the Golovkin thing, the Golovkin Canelo fight. So I got to be honest with you, I didn't set up my alarm for the co-main event, but I did set it for the main event, and I managed to catch that. I think the fight really went how I thought it was going to go, if I'm being honest, but with a less entertainment value to it. I thought it'd be a better fight, but I did think Canelo was going to win wide on the scorecards. I think Golovkin really struggled to really press the action for most of the fight, and it was he tried to replicate the kind of performance he had against Murata. Took a lot of punishment early in the fight, and then kind of banked on coming into it the second half of the fight. And I feel like it was just too late. I think against certain levels, no disrespect to Murata, but he's no Canelo, is he? Let's face it. I think against a Canelo, trying to bank in on take it to the later rounds, I think Canelo was just too good for that, and I think Canelo was too sharp for him on the night. I think Golovkin really struggled with his engine. His biggest asset for me was always how much punishment he could take, how much he could dish out at the same time. And for me, Golovkin just wasn't able to kind of roll back the clock like he used to be able to. So I think that worked in Canelo's favor, and I think Canelo was just too fresh and strong for him, if I'm being honest. So moving on to kind of where I'd like to see both from them both next. So with Golovkin, I think I'd like to see him retire. I think he's got nothing to prove at 160 anymore. He's already a Hall of Fame champion. I think it'd be sad to see him lose to a fighter in that division that we know in his prime he's better than. Let's face it, but especially someone like a Eubank Jr. or someone when we know he's much better than. But if he's past it, there's a good chance he could possibly lose to a fighter like that, a young, hungry fighter. In terms of Canelo, I wouldn't want to see Canelo stay at 168. I think he's done that division. I think he's conquered it. I do take into consideration what Adam said about the Benavidez fight, but I'd like to see Benavidez earn that fight a bit more against Canelo. I would like to see from 160 to 168, I'd like to see those guys kind of fight each other now. Whilst Canelo's going to have the supposed long layoff, I think like a lot of the time, both divisions have kind of been waiting around to get that Canelo shot. So let's get them fighting each other, and I think then the fans will ultimately decide who they'd like to see.
You want
Canelo.
payday? You want payday?
Exactly. But I think with that light heavyweight division brewing, you've got the likes of Bivol, Beterbiev, Ramirez, even with your Boatsies, your yards coming up. I'd like Canelo to have a good go at that weight division next and see if he can be competitive in it. He's dipped his toes in it, to say the least. He beat an aging Kovalev, and he also obviously fought Bivol, who came up short against. So let's kind of see how that light heavyweight division pans out, and then Canelo can throw himself into that mix once he's had that year to kind of rest up and almost grow into the division physically. That's all from me.
That's fair. I don't think he'll ever get in the ring with Beterbiev.
No, and nor should he get in the ring with Beterbiev.
Yeah, it's one of those ones where I think that's probably his ceiling, and I think if we see Canelo at 175, I think it's going to be the Bivol rematch, and that's about it.
Yeah, Chepo and Eddie Reynoso would not let him near Beterbiev.
They're too smart. They are too smart. It's the interesting one. Like you said, he's cleaned out 168 outside of Benavidez, and to be honest, and if we're being honest about it, it's only Benavidez's fault he hasn't had that fight, because Canelo fought for the WBC belt. Why was Benavidez not champion? He missed weight. That's on him. like you said, he hasn't done anything to earn that fight. But the fun thing is Canelo was like, "Go fight another champion." He's like, "I can't. You have all the belts." So yeah. So
I'd adversely to what Michael said, I'd like to see Canelo drop down to 160.
Do you reckon he could make 160?
Yeah, I definitely think he could.
I think
he could. He's only young. He's only 32, and his frame hasn't changed much. Like we've seen him his frame when he fought Kovalev was the same as when he fought Bivol. And at 168, he's just not cutting the extra few pounds. I think he could easily make 160.
That's it'd be very interesting to see. I think it'll be dictated by how the year goes and how he finds taking the weight off after the year off.
Yeah. But just before we move on to this weekend, another comment from the DAZN commentary just before the first bell went. Todd Grisham says Canelo has a deep dislike for Triple H. And
I heard that.
That's what happens when you get WWE pundits on boxing.
Yeah, exactly. And I was sat there absolutely pissing myself for the first 30 seconds of that fight. I was like, did he just say that?
It's
the cerebral assassin.
Yeah.
See, for a company, right, who've come into boxing, to the credit where credit is due, in the UK, they have built a brilliant production team from the commentary team right the way through. It's really, really good. In America, they have so many quality analysts, and the best to ever do it was available. Jim Lapley was there. They could have paid him a small truckload of money, and he was there. They've got it's awful. Anyway, moving on.
They could have nicked Jim Lampley and Roy Jones and
Teddy Atlas. Teddy Atlas would be a good shot.
Yeah, he's too honest for the zone, though.
Yeah, he is.
Yeah,
he's not a company
ESPN,
man,
isn't he? Yeah.
So,
but no, fire ahead, Adam.
So moving on to this weekend, basically we'll go through the Joe Joyce card and then we'll talk about Shakur Stevens at the end. So we have Joe Joyce versus Joseph Parker for the completely unnecessary WBO Interim Heavyweight Championship of the world. Amanda Serrano is fighting Sarah Mahfoud, if I get that correctly, which I definitely haven't, for the super featherweight titles. And I was having a look at the undercard, and the one that kind of jumps out at me is kind of Nathan Heaney is also fighting on the card, and Raven Chapman, who is a really good prospect coming through. And I've got a lot of time for Raven, so I'll go through her. But other than that, guys, what do you think?
I think it's a card where most people are just tuning in for the main event, and it's one of those BT events, isn't it, where all the money's been pumped into the top of the card and not very much put into the bottom of it.
It was funny. They were talking about so many different fights that could potentially land on this card. And they were talking about really building it up, and we're thinking, this will be one of those cards. And it's not. It's just worked out as being exactly as you said. What do you think? What do you think is going to happen this weekend, Michael?
Yeah, to be honest with you, I'm guilty of being one of those fans. When I look at the card, the only fight that interests me on that card is the main event. If I want to comment on the main, we're talking about the main event, though, it's a very intriguing main event, to say the least, I think. I think this is a good matchup. I think it's a good 50-50. I think Joe Joyce kind of needs this big test now. Obviously, he's stayed amateur for so long. He needs a big contender like Joseph Parker now to take him to the next level. Whereas Joseph Parker is kind of a must-win fight for him to get that title shot now. I think Joseph Parker needs to, if he wants to prove to himself and to the fans that he's good enough to win a world title, he needs to beat someone like Joe Joyce. This is the kind of test for him, in my opinion. But I think there's a lot of questions to be asked of not just Joseph Parker, but I think of Andy Lee as a trainer as well. I think this is the first time Andy Lee, as the head coach, is kind of, up against, taking his main fighter into a big fight and to see if he can come up with some sort of game plan to beat another top fight. That makes sense. I think he was number 2 in Tyson Fury's camp, wasn't he, after Sugar Hill? So it'd be interesting to see, this would be Andy Lee's biggest test as a trainer. But I also think that, it's really a must-win for Joseph Parker as well. Because I think if Joseph Parker comes up short, it's hard to find a way back for him, especially as he's kind of moved his life, his family over to Morecambe. This is kind of the big test for him now, going to take to the next step. But if I was to make a prediction, I think Joe Joyce is just going to wear him down. I think he's going to be too strong for Parker. I think Parker's going to look sharp really early on in the fight. But I think when it goes to the second half of the fight, Joe Joyce is going to take over. And I think he's going to, like he says on the tin, he's going to be the juggernaut. And I think he's going to take him out late.
Nice. What do you think, Luke?
Yeah, it's hard to argue with that. On the undercard briefly, Amanda Serrano, great to see her over in the UK. It's nice to see her giving the fans one of the best, women fighters on the planet again. So great to see her perform over there. I think she will get the win. It's down at 126, where she seems to be most comfortable and punching hardest. So, probably an exciting, explosive affair there. Nathan Heaney draws a crowd, sells tickets. Probably will get to English title level, and that'll be about it for him. I'd like to see him against one of my pals, Bradley Ray, in the future. I think that's a good fight for an English title or something.
Yep.
And yeah, I think he's an exciting fighter, and he brings a crowd, and it'll be loud for him anyways. That's for sure. Yeah. For the main event, Andy Lee, as a coach, I think he's listened to him talk. He knows boxing inside and out. He lives it, breathes it. And when you read his book, when you listen to him talk about his time in Detroit with Emmanuel Stewart, the stuff he got to see and do outside of the gym taught him just as much as he learned inside of it. And he's a very philosophical guy, very wise. And I think he's more of a teacher than a coach. And that's something that boxing is missing a lot of in a lot of gyms. And I think we saw the improvements in Parker for the Chisora rematch. I thought Chisora won the first fight. I had a 6 apiece, and then the knockdown just had him winning it. It was a scrappy fight in the first one, but then in the rematch, Parker dominated it. Had Chisora on his last legs a few times. But that's one thing that's going to be detrimental to him, I think, in this fight is the lack of finishing ability. And I think it's a tough enough task hurting Joe Joyce. But if he does hurt him somehow, he's got to be able to get him out of there. And I don't think he's got the finishing instincts to do that. I think Joe's going to be too big, too strong. The jab he showed against Dubois, we need to see that again from Joe Joyce if he wants to have much success against Parker. He can't just come in, take punches in the face and try and land, because Parker will be away with his good footwork and his movement. He's got to use a good jab. He's got to be imposing. He's got to stay in front of Parker the whole night while not shipping punishment as much as he can. Obviously, we know he's going to get hit. And if Hammer can land those shots that he landed, Parker's definitely going to land a few bombs early. But I think, like Michael said, I think it's going to be a grind. I think he's going to wear him down, and it'll either be a late stoppage or I'm going to go for a stoppage, I think, but I can see it being a wide enough decision for him anyways, with it being on BT and a Frank Warren card. But yeah, I think he will stop Parker late.
Yeah, I kind of agree with your kind of arguments. So Joseph Parker is one of those guys. I'm going to come to Andy Lee after. Joseph Parker has a lot going for him. He's got the Samoan heritage, so he's got a chin made of granite. He's got fast hands. He's got fast feet. And he's got good boxing skills. And he doesn't put it together. Back when he won his heavyweight title, I thought he was quite fortunate to get the decision against Andy Ruiz.
Me too.
Sorry, Michael?
No, sorry. I think for Joseph Parker, for me, he's a very good, well-rounded fighter, but he's not particularly brilliant at anything. That's what I find with Joseph Parker.
So for me, what Parker lacked was the kind of subsequent aggression that you need to establish yourself and dictate a fight at heavyweight. So the Dillian Whyte fight is one where if I look at Dillian Whyte and I look at Joseph Parker is the better boxer. And he lost that fight because he just didn't want to engage, and Whyte wanted it more. And it's one of those very rare fights where I'm looking at it going, he's losing this fight because he just doesn't want it as much as the other guy. And I think, and that's something that has continually been seen in a lot of Joseph Parker's fights. He's one of those guys where you see the cruise. Like, he consistently he'll do enough, and he'll do enough. And then when you want him to go, to change the fight, to press for the stoppage, to really entertain, or when, in this case, when the going gets tough, it's not necessarily been there. Now, I look, and I know Enda is a huge Andy Lee fan. I've got a love Andy Lee. He's a brilliant interview, and like you said, he's very philosophical, and he clearly knows so much about the game. However, does not always translate into a successful coach. So I think it's a really good point. I'm fascinated to see how Andy Lee's first real charge as a head coach goes. I was really excited. I love Joe Joyce. I'm not going to hide the fact that I've been a huge advocate and fan of Joe since, before the kind of Olympics. He is what he is, right? If you are looking for a Tyson Fury, Anthony Joshua, slick behind the jab, throws combinations, Joe Joyce is the juggernaut. And a granite chin, an engine, and he doesn't necessarily load up on punches, which means he can throw all night. If Joseph Parker is going to win this, he has to have enough authority in his jab and his footwork so that he can dictate enough of the pace and land the punches he's inevitably going to land. If he just succeeds the center of the ring to Joe and steps around and just keeps stepping and stepping away, he's not going to land enough punches to win this fight, in my view. I do have faith, however, in his conditioning and his chin, and I think Joe Joyce will win this one on points. That's my general guess is here. I'm not certain Joe will be able to get to him enough to do enough to hurt him, but we'll kind of wait and see. They're both at that age as the heavyweights. We're waiting for the slip as well. Joe's 36, has God knows how many amateur fights. Parker has been through an awful lot as a professional as well. I've been with some really good guys. So the potential wear and tear is there. I think it will be a really good fight. I'm very excited for it as well. On the undercard, Amanda Serrano is phenomenal. She's the third best female fighter for me behind Taylor and Shields. And I think she'll get the stoppage over the weekend. And Raven Chapman is one of the next best female fighters coming through. She's managed by Steffi Bull, and she's a whirlwind. I saw her train. So she used to train at the amateur gym I trained when I lived down south. And she was an absolute animal, and I did everything I could to avoid ever sparring with her, which was a wise choice on my point of view. Last but not least, we have the unified super featherweight title between Shakur Stevenson and Robinson Conceição, the Brazilian gold medalist. This, guys, is one of those fights where I think the two boxers in it are bloody brilliant, and it's probably not going to be great fun to watch. What do we think?
Yeah, I don't know an awful lot about Shakur Stevenson's opponent, but what I can say is obviously his most notable opponent was Oscar Valdez. Lost on points in that one. He seems to be tough and durable. I think it's kind of a potential banana skin for Shakur Stevenson. I agree with you. I don't think it's going to be the most entertaining fight, but I think it'll probably be quite a comfortable wide point position for Shakur Stevenson. And I think he'll probably pretty much jab his way to victory. And then I think hopefully we can get a big fight for Shakur Stevenson next. It's kind of one of those, it's a fight for him. And then it's all about what the next one is really for this. But he needs to stay focused, get the win, no matter if it's pretty or if it's ugly. He needs to get the job done. And I think that's kind of how the fans are taking it, another defense and hopefully a big one next, I think.
So So a bit of context of who his opponent is. Conceição won gold, I think it was in Rio, but he fought Valdez and, in my opinion, beat Valdez as well. This is the interesting part of this: is Valdez was their kind of common opponent. Shakur comfortably beat him, and I thought Conceição wasn't necessarily comfortable, but it was clear. What do you think, Luke?
I'm looking forward to seeing this Shakur kid. I've not seen him box before. I've heard he's pretty good. I don't know. Yeah, look, you know my thoughts on Shakur. I think he's future pound for pound king. Conceição is a really great example of someone who adjusted his style for the pros. He boxes nothing like how he boxed in the amateurs. In the amateurs, he used to box in flurries, get away, box in flurries, get away, and try and overwhelm you on the inside. Bang, 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 get away. And in the pros, he likes to box at a consistent pace and slows it down nicely for the pro style. Now, the only problem for that with him in this fight is if you box at one pace, Stevenson will box at that pace just better than you, and he'll do that all night long. And I think, though, one thing that is kind of like an outlying factor, it's got nothing to do with the boxing, is it's a homecoming for Shakur Stevenson. He's in front of his home crowd. He's going to be looking to get a KO in this fight. And I think he will take one or two risks more than he usually would. And he's looking to, obviously, keep those belts. He wants to be undisputed before he moves up. Hopefully we can get him against a fellow Welshman there, Joe Cordina, for a undisputed fight in, I know it's probably disrespectful to say the O2 Arena, because I don't think it would be in Cardiff unless it was on the undercard or something.
No, I agree.
But yeah, I hope to God, Shakur can come over to the UK and I can get a plane over and watch him fight. And I think he's going to win this. I don't think he's going to get the stoppage. I think he is going to try and go for it, but I think it is going to be a wide points decision.
Yeah, I think it's one of those ones where one is a good boxer and one's a great boxer, which is mad to say that the one I'm talking about that's great, that's good, is the gold medalist. Not the silver medalist, but they ran.
And I think in defense too, Conceição as well, once Shakur moves up, he'll probably be a champ.
Yeah. So I will say this: he is brilliant. He's really, really good, and he's one of the top super featherweights going. And like you said, once Shakur cleans out and moves out of that division, I wouldn't be surprised to see him win a belt or two.
Not at all.
It's not an especially deep
Cordina
division.
will kick him out of the division. He'll beat him and he'll send him out of the division when he realises that the Welshman's too good.
It's a hard style. It's a hard style because it's hard to box with him. With guys like Shakur, you've got to basically put it on them. You've got to get on their chest and give them absolutely no room to breathe and suffocate them. And that's not his game. And it's going to be really hard. I rate Shakur really highly. Just like, look, I think he's brilliant. But yeah, I think he'll probably try. And when he figures out that Conceição is not going anywhere of his own accord, I think it will be a kind of a fairly routine one. That run at 130 is underappreciated. If he goes Valdez, Conceição, and Cordina, that is a really solid run of fights.
And Herring. Herring was...
Herring. Totally forgot about Herring as well.
And
so that's a really good run at that.
Yeah, one thing with Shakur, I'm going to name Devin Haney alongside him too, although I don't rate Devin Haney anywhere near as good as Shakur. They're on that kind of Floyd Mayweather level of maturity for their age.
Yeah.
Like, when Floyd was that young, he could not be goaded into a war. He boxed his fight. And it's the same thing now with Haney. We saw it against Kambosos. And we've seen it in every one of Shakur's fights, let's be real. He boxes his fight no matter what. And he's only young, but he never gets Valdez couldn't draw him into a fight as much as he tried. Do you know? And that's such a great strength to have, that mental maturity and, inner, I suppose, stubbornness, the word for it, sticking to the game plan. You don't care what the crowd are saying. You don't care what your opponent's doing. Yeah. You're sticking to what's working. And we've seen so many fighters in the past go out of their game plans, especially young fighters, and come unstuck. Look at Kambosos Lopez. If Lopez would have stuck to a game plan, he would have beat Kambosos easy, but the maturity wasn't there. Whereas with Shakur, as much as Conceição is going to try and get him to maybe stand with him a couple of times, it's not going to happen. And if he boxes one pace, Shakur will do that all night. No problem.
Yeah, Shakur for me is one of those guys where if you just keep putting him in with like really tough opponents, because that's what will get. If you put him in with guys he's supposed to beat, that's where people will start to complain, because he's not like a Golovkin or a Tank who's going to put somebody to sleep. He's not a card carrier, so somebody that you're like, I'm going to pay to go see him. You're going to pay to watch Shakur because he might lose. That's how you're going to end up doing that, or can they get to him? Which will be interesting. Now,
we'd pay to see beautiful boxing.
Yeah,
for the vast majority,
we are the losers and the outliers.
We are. Yeah.
So, what last thing I'm going to finish on, right, on Shakur, and I'm going to paint you a map of how I see the next 12 months going in his career, and it runs alongside somebody else. Shakur beats Cansao. Haney beats Kambosos. The next fights for each of them is probably Cordina, if we're lucky. And then it's Lomachenko versus Haney. Shakur beats Cordina. In my opinion, Lomachenko would beat Haney. And Lomachenko versus Shakur Stevens for the undisputed lightweight title. What do you say to that?
Yeah, I wouldn't say no.
Yeah, I pay my money's worth for sure.
Yeah. I do think Haney would be a tough night's work for Loma, though. I really do.
I think Haney beats Loma. I think the size of him and his jab and his very simple but effective footwork, which throws Lomachenko off. As good as Lomachenko is, if you don't buy into his fancy shit, he's like, you need to buy what he's selling.
Yeah.
But if you don't, it's actually a simple enough style that Loma has if you don't buy what he's selling you. But you just have to be intelligent enough to not fall for it on the night.
To not do that, and not panic.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I think Haney versus Loma is as close to 50-50 as it's ever been.
Yeah,
especially the longer you wait, the better Haney gets, and Loma will start to fight.
and the bigger Haney gets too.
Yeah,
that's it. I think Haney would use his physical advantages in those fights. I think he'd be too fresh. He'll have too much of an engine for him on the night. I think Loma, 3 or 4 years ago, I'd say hands down Loma wins that all day long.
But I think if Haney has any sense, now that roadmap is fantastic. Whoever wins that fight with Loma and Haney, Lomachenko would definitely fight Shakur because Loma's got nowhere to go.
Yeah.
Whereas Haney has the option to move up, and
which
I think he would. Yeah, I think he would.
Will. But then all the belts fragment is fun to watch. But yeah, so that's what we think, guys. I'm going to pass you back over to Linda to wrap up the show.
Yes, that's exactly what Enda's asking you guys to do, because my battery's going to die and I kind of needed to check in. Okay. It's been great, lads. Las Vegas was awesome. Thanks for all your help. Tune in next week. We'll be reviewing the fights the guys were previewing this week, and we'll take it from there. And congrats to Marty for winning the pin. All his wonderful comments on the YouTubes helped with his entries. So best of luck, guys, and see you next week, and enjoy the boxing.
Enjoy, boys. Cheers.